Hello and welcome to Eye Openers. If you have not had your coffee yet, I welcome you to join us, join Cameron and I, as we kick off a Monday with a really fun conversation around workplace culture and with some eye-opening insights about how to live your life and run your business in a way that is much more fulfilling and ultimately gives you a greater return. But we don't do this alone. We do it with something to help inspire those eye-opening moments, which for me is my deep love of caffeine and coffee. Uh, and today I am drinking my friend's coffee, not like her actual cup, but I mean my friend Erin, who has an amazing coffee shop in town, Handlebar Coffee Roasters in Santa Barbara. And the guy is just the nicest guy. He donates coffee every Friday for parents at the school. And we definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
But he's just like that person you want to say hi to in the morning, and just a really great entrepreneur. He's in there leading his team every day, even though he doesn't have to. So I really commend him for that and love supporting him in that way. How about you, Cameron? What is your coffee of choice or your eye opener of choice this morning?
Well, this morning I am drinking, being a Seattle girl, I'm drinking Starbucks.
Perfect.
But I did make it at home. It's Pike Place Roast, notes of cocoa and rich praline. But no, I'm a big coffee girl myself, and I love that this is eye openers, and that your love of caffeine like trumps all else. I mean, that's fantastic.
Well, so people might not know this, but I also grew up in Washington State. And so I feel like there is this real culture around coffee,
Hmm.
um, mostly because of Starbucks. But, pizza's up there. There's lots of coffee culture in the
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest. And I think that I saw that early on, like even in high school, meeting my friends like at a Starbucks and hanging out. And I just enjoyed it as a meeting place. I spent endless hours studying at a Starbucks. I preferred it to the library just because I think because of the humans and like the connection and the warmth of that environment. And so I think because of that, it is just deeply rooted in my process, a part of my work, a part of my learning, and here, part of this podcast. So thank you guys all for being part of it with us. Oh, we have some friends on here saying they also have their coffee and love their caffeine. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Crystal. Good to have you guys with us. So let's tell everybody why they should even be paying attention today and hear a bit from our special guest, Miss Kamrin. So Kamrin is an executive leadership and personal development coach. She focuses on helping women in their 50s make extraordinary change. She was born in Seattle, but now resides in Providence, Rhode Island with her husband, daughter, cat, and new puppy, who I have been lucky enough to get the chance to meet, and the puppy is so adorable. She lived in China, Vietnam, Germany, and New York City in the beginning part of her career. Prior to becoming a coach, she worked in consumer goods and international operations for brands like Adidas, Coach, and Brahmin. So you guys, when we talk about organizational culture today, we are talking about these like global enterprise, these known brands, these companies that you have heard of or you probably have in your house. And that's why Kamrin's experience and what she's going to share with us, these eye-opening moments we're going to have today, are so valuable. Now, not only does she do all that, but she's so passionate about helping women find their voice that she is the host of the podcast 50 But Not Dead, 50 Not Dead. Sorry. And that is about I guess, fighting against gendered ageism in the workplace. Cameron, why don't you kick off by just telling us a little bit about the podcast and why
Oh,
people in?
thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here with you, Brittany. I always love a chance to get to see you, of course, to have coffee. And the podcast is really, it's just a really special thing to me. It wasn't my dream to become a podcaster. I would never have guessed, actually, that I would be a podcast host. But as I was looking at turning 50, I guess last year, because I'll be 51 soon, I was feeling really good and feeling like I have so much to offer and so much to learn still. And like my business was doing well, and I have so many ideas for it. And then I started hearing things that were totally the like the converse of that, of just like, um, oh, well, that's when you become most invisible, is nothing, nobody is more invisible than a 50-year-old mother. I'm like, oh,
Oh.
great. That feels really good. And talking to women who, certainly the pandemic really, like, I think brought this to the forefront, but many women were laid off or furloughed or had to step out of the workplace because of
Right.
the pandemic. So they had to step out to take care of elderly parents or children or both. And they
Mm,
were saying things to me like, I may never work again. I may have to take a huge pay cut. I haven't interviewed in 15 years.
mm,
And I just thought, God, the pandemic didn't happen to women over 50. Like, what is happening here? And it seemed to highlight and put an acceleration on this thing that I was just learning about, because nobody tells you that all of a sudden you turn 50 and like a new clock is ticking. I mean, like some clock seems to always be ticking for us. And so it's like the podcast was a place initially for me to just give voice to this of, okay, have I interview a different woman every week, and
yeah.
we talk about her experience. Has she encountered extreme gendered ageism? And some of it is just like blatantly obvious and horrible. It's
Mm,
like, oh, I turned 50. I had my 50th birthday party, and then I was basically escorted out the door, which is illegal, but can be housed in things like, oh, department restructure or
mhm.
something like that. But then also, I didn't want it to turn into just a big bitch fest. I wanted it to, because I knew that would get old for people really quick.
Sure,
I
sure.
also wanted to
And
show
we all know
some,
it's broken, right? Like, how many times do we have to hear it's broken? But what else did
yeah,
you do?
and have it be also some place for good stories too, like some
Right.
things that would inspire us, and then to have some tough conversations sometimes. So that is 50 Not Dead. And it has become like a real part of my life, and it's part of my business, but more of the part that is really the people that I want to serve.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's what I appreciated about you, like not shying away from something that might be uncomfortable for people to talk about, but really giving space to it so that people they can go to your podcast if they're having these challenges, or to not feel like alone in that experience. I think is so important. I know that just even thinking about the Barbie movie, which might,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully to other people who are here listening, that it just highlighted so many things we knew deep down, but we just didn't like talk about collectively or out loud with other people. And so hopefully this creates like a same experience for that.
Yeah,
But
there are
it
a lot
also
of
makes,
places.
yeah. So, oh, and Crystal saying that, yes, feeling unseen. This seems to not be where we need to be. Women of all ages should be visible and with in ranges of knowledge, right? So, really, you should be at the peak, right? Because you have so much experience, and it's not being recognized or seen that way. So that your podcast and what you're doing there really does bring us to why I wanted to have you on. People might not know, but I had the privilege of being with Kamrin early on and launching into your coaching career. And you have so much amazing experience in businesses, in these, really best businesses in the world. But they are not, they don't come without their challenges. And they definitely are not perfect examples of workplace culture. And I know so much of the reason why you started your coaching business is what you had experienced, and some of the negative impacts of being in these more toxic workplaces. And while I love to focus on the positive too, and we're going to totally pull out positive components of this, I do think it's really important to acknowledge where we're starting. And a lot
Mhm.
of places are in a low starting point, and a lot of people are having really negative experiences in their workplace. And if for nothing else, I just want to highlight that you are not alone in that. And a lot of people work for these big global brands and have these terrible experiences. But if this can be, if we can give you a few ideas on how to either move within that landscape or get out of it or challenge it in a way that works for you, then I would say mission accomplished today. So,
Right.
Cameron, would you mind sharing either your own experience, and I don't mind, you don't have to share any confidential information, but what was something that happened in your workplace experience that really ultimately led you to wanting to become an executive coach and help people who are facing challenges?
Oh, thank you, Brittany. So it was really, you know, it was really interesting. I had been seeing some behavior, and I think that, I'd worked in fashion for a long time and working in the athletic industry. I mean, these places are known to be competitive environments, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's like it's fast paced. It's, in the athletic industry, there's a lot of bro culture. There is, in the fashion industry, there's a diva culture at times, and so you go into it kind of knowing some of that. But what really turned for me was, I mean, I loved it. I mean, I love not what I just described, right? Diva and bro stuff. But I mean, I really loved my jobs that I'd had. And I felt like it gave me tremendous opportunity. But when I was the target and really was in something that I would consider toxic, all of a sudden I started having this feeling of being on edge all the time, knowing that I was going to be quizzed in front of large groups of people, called out for facts that, I mean, I ran an entire, I ran all of operations for a global organization. There's a lot of detail. But I would be quizzed in front of people for it all the time. And so, and all of a sudden, like, no matter what I did, it was never right. So no matter how hard I tried, it was never okay. And I'd seen other women be targeted in one of these particular organizations, and I was just like, oh my God, this is horrible. Like, why would we allow for this? And it is a very interesting thing. And you might say, well, Cameron, why don't you just speak up for God's sakes? Like, why don't you do something about it, right? And in hindsight, I should have. I
Mm.
knew something was odd, and I told myself, wow, when it's my turn, I'm out of here. But I'd been out of the workforce for 3 years. And when I had a baby, I stayed out for 3 years, and it was wonderful. I'm so lucky to have had that time. And so I was hesitant to speak up and say, I don't think this is right. Like, I don't think we should be humiliating people in front of their peers. That doesn't seem like a positive experience, because then people are afraid to talk. And I saw this happening where people would be like really torn down publicly. And, I wasn't, it didn't take long before I saw somebody leave, had to be going to the hospital because they were such a mess, from having to struggle with this. And I didn't quite know what was going on, except I told myself when it was my turn, I'd leave. But when it was my turn, it is really insidious. And it really got under my skin where I could no longer discern. This has happened to, I've seen it happen to, this woman and this woman and this woman and this one. All of a sudden it was me. And it was like, holy crap, maybe I really am stupid. Maybe I am worthless. Maybe
Mm.
my 20 years of experience are outdated. And I asked if they would support me with a coach. And I was laughed at and said that only the greenest of managers would be supported with a coach. And I was like, an executive coach? And so they wouldn't support it. And I was asking the CEO and head of HR,
Wow.
and they said no. And I was just really honest. I was just like, just nothing is working. And that really led me you know, to ultimately want to help other women who are in my situation. Like, because I didn't know where to turn. Like, if your company doesn't support you, where do you go? And
Right.
then it just gets under your skin and like, oh, is it just me? Do I just try harder?
Right. Well, that's such an interesting point that, I think people believe like, oh, if I recognize that this was happening to me, I would do something about it or I'd speak up. And this is so similar to like if you face domestic abuse or even just psychological abuse in a partnership or something, where you turn on yourself. And that's
Mhm.
the thing that nobody anticipates is the way that these abuses or just bullying, toxic environments take place is it starts to make you question you. And that's what's so dangerous about it. But by the time we can recognize that, we've already gone down this path of thinking, I'm not enough, or maybe you've burned yourself out trying to be enough and realizing it's never going to be enough. There's so
Yeah.
many things that we try to do to fix it because the feeling is so uncomfortable, especially when you're a high performer and you've been recognized as a high performer for most of your career. It can be so confusing, and that being in that mental space is what is so challenging.
Yes, absolutely. And you nailed it when you said it's like psychological manipulation. I mean, that's where, and I didn't understand that. I
Mhm.
remember telling another colleague, I'm like, oh my God, you have to leave. Like, get out of here. You're being treated so horribly. And she said, I can't quit. And I remember asking, but well, it's not about quitting. I mean, it's about like saving your dignity and saving your soul. And I just didn't get it. And I didn't know what her financial situation was. I'm like, well, maybe it's not my business.
Yeah.
And I really, really loved working with this person, but I just thought this is dangerous. And then when it was my turn, I couldn't quit because I was bound and determined to figure out what to like make it right, to like flip the switch and no, I'm not useless. Like I'm not an idiot. Like, why do you hate me? And um, yeah, and all of a sudden, and it just, as you said, once you go through that door, if you don't notice it right away, it's a really slippery slope. And I would say I stayed 18 months too long, to the point where I was in near personal complete destruction. And it wasn't good. It was so unhealthy.
So what kind of things did you notice start to happen, like maybe in your body for yourself, like your mental health? What did you notice as it was starting to get pretty bad?
So, as somebody who was responsible for all kinds of things and was now quizzed on these things, I couldn't remember anything at all. It was such a nightmare. And I had worked, I mean, at other big, big companies where I had to know, prices of, you know, leathers and handbags and buckles and all these different things for, from 5 years ago. And I mean, and we had to know that stuff, but we weren't, and it was nitpicky and niggly, but it wasn't being called out publicly. And
Yeah.
I couldn't remember anything. And so that was not great. And then if people asked me outside of work, how are you doing? I would just get this like lump in my throat. It was
Mhm.
like I could hardly speak about it without wanting to burst into tears. And it was terrible because I wasn't in a place where I was actively looking to
Mhm.
leave. I really wanted to make it work still, but it was like my voice, like the voice inside of me had been crushed so badly, and I think that's where it was really like literally stuck in my throat, and that
Wild.
was terrible. And then afterwards, when I did leave, then it got physically even worse. It was like then because it was like my body was so used to being under that pressure that then I experienced panic attacks for the first time. And I'd had anxiety before where, sometimes you wake up and feels like there's a weight on your chest and you're like, oh, I can't breathe. And you maybe think you're having a heart attack and it's really scary. But and sometimes, and not to say that anxiety attacks aren't terrifying because they really can be, but I'd had anxiety, but I hadn't had panic and I didn't know the difference. And panic is even more physical, where all of a sudden I felt like I was going to shatter into a million pieces.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was
People
bizarre.
who don't know, it's much more acute. It feels like an 11 out of 10. Like it.
Yes,
Mhm.
it was terrifying. So I'm like, I can't drive. Can I take care of my daughter? Can I drive and take care of my daughter? Can I do anything? And that was absolutely terrifying. And that was when I I mean, I got a lot of help.
Right, right. So what you're describing makes so much sense and is so consistent actually with symptoms we see in PTSD. So
Mm.
I don't often put my clinical hat on, but I think it's really important to illustrate that though in the nature of this work. Like I think people minimize it when they're in a toxic work environment. Like if I share with people, if I'm at a dinner party and I share what I do, or someone asks, like, oh my gosh, I need you to come. Like you need to come talk to my boss about this or whatever. It's so bad. And it's fine to flippantly say that, but I think there needs to be space to really recognize if you are in that, because it can be so damaging to you personally. And that symptom that you described of forgetfulness is classic, where if we are so flooded with cortisol and our adrenals are firing because we are in fight or flight all the time, or especially when we're at the workplace, then our executive functioning gets worse. And
Yeah.
the irony is, like, a lot of bosses or people use this tactic to try to like bully you into being more productive or better, or keep you on your toes. They think
Oh my
to
God.
perform
Oh
more.
my God. As you say that, I'm just like, oh my God, some of this stuff is like words that they would use, you know? I
Yeah,
mean, literally, it was thought to be a positive.
but the irony is it makes people perform worse.
Mm.
And I feel like if people just understand, I really feel like there are some bullies out there who think they're doing the right thing.
Hmm.
I think they really do want the best for their people and their business, and they think this is the right way. And then there's some people who are real jerks, and we can talk about that too. But for those people who are like kind of on the fence, you're like kind of a good person. Do not do this, because not only are you impairing the functionality of your people, you are going to lose productivity and ultimately ROI. Like on your team, they're going to be lower performers. So for just the business case alone, like never mind the fact that you should just be a good human and treat people with respect. The data supports that this is the worst thing you could do for your business.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Brittany. And it was very interesting because it was a revolving door. And I remember being also just thinking, like, why aren't we talking about this? Like, why aren't we talking about the fact that so many people come in and then they leave? They come in and then they leave. And like, I had never been at a senior level where that kind of thing, if it were happening, wasn't like, okay, we are having a conversation about this. What
Right.
is happening? Because it's expensive. It's
Yes.
really expensive. Not and to your point, the loss of productivity for the ones that stay and the potential, health um, impact.
Mm,
But also, I mean, unless you are a recruiter, I don't think you want your HR department to be full-time recruiters, and like just like constantly, 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 because any of us who have held jobs where we depend on other people to do good work, my gosh, it takes a long time to get somebody trained and acclimated and learn all the systems and all of the language that you use that's specific to your industry. And to just watch that walk out the door over and over and over again, yeah, I mean, I cannot imagine that anybody would say, this seems like a really good business idea if
right.
it isn't.
Right. Some of the research suggests that a loss leader is the loss in productivity and all that. It adds up to 150% of their annual salary. Right.
Wow.
So if you think about what executives are being paid, or any top
Mm.
talent, anybody, when you lose someone, it's essentially like losing 150% of that person's salary,
Yeah.
and lost productivity and the training time and the recruiting, payout, like all of that. So it really behooves people to pay attention to how we are leading, how are we taking care of our people, how are we showing that we're invested and supportive, because creating a more positive culture for the workplace, not only, I make this business case all the time, but it should be about the people. It should be about wanting to create a good work experience and create a place for people to come together to create something bigger than themselves. But beyond that, I always tie in the business case, because sometimes at the end of the day, it's about money. And
Yeah,
even if that's about money for you, it still supports that this is the direction we should move in.
absolutely.
I see my friend Matt, who's also a Washingtonian.
Lovely.
That tough economic climates unfortunately do bring out the worst in people. You were so right, Matt. Talking to many people with a toxic leader or company thinking they can fix it, or that it's somehow their fault or problem. Life is too short. I couldn't agree more. And you guys, if you want a great example of what to do to build a positive work environment, Matt is amazing. His company, Heinz Marketing, is incredible. And the way he takes care of his people is very inspirational. So, Kamrin, what do you wish someone had done in that moment? Either, I'm thinking more about the other people who either witnessed this happening or even your boss. Like, how do you wish they had confronted you if there was challenges or better developed you versus this kind of toxic bullying that you experienced?
Oh, it's so interesting because I wanted to make a quick point that, you had said something, Brittany, about that some people feel like it's the right thing to do. And I'd worked in Asia before standards of engagement had really been rolled out in the um, athletic and fashion big manufacturing, where people were accused of sweatshops and where we worked like dogs. I mean, we worked really hard. I mean, this was the 90s, late 90s. And I worked 16-hour days. I went to work with worms. That's really pleasant. I went to work with some kind of Asian measles or mumps. I think some kind of form of Asian mumps. I worked through it. I would work, I remember leaving the office at 3, going home, showering, coming back, working, getting on a flight, working the flight, getting off in Europe, going and presenting. I mean, like, I had worked under incredibly pretty, I would say, tough condition, like expectations, very, very, very high expectations. But the difference was that it was recognized and I was thanked. And I was, and it was so interesting because even though it wasn't necessarily always pleasant, right, to work that like crazy like that, I write about the boss I had then all the time because I learned so much and I knew that he took time out to grow me, to have conversations, to teach me things. And so even though I was working like a complete dog and passed out at work one day because I hadn't slept in God knows how long, and I was, sick as a dog, and I mean, just with all this stuff, it was still, I hold it as a huge opportunity versus this other situation where I was working hard, but I was being torn apart. It was like being like shredded, like a piece of paper that literally was just being shredded. How much could they take away each day? And what I wish, if I could turn the clocks back, what would have been so helpful is if the CEO had just gotten curious. Like, oh, you know what? We brought you in and we really, I mean, I think they had really high, I don't think that we started out thinking we are going to hate each other by the time this ends, right? I mean, and if she had asked, like, what's going on, or like, where do you need support, or is there something that I'm missing, right? Or anything, any kind of curiosity or personal development that was embraced within the company, because there was no personal development. And in fact, there were just, and I remember really missing that of just like, I was really lucky to start my career at a time where certainly big companies were really embracing a lot of personal development. I was so lucky to have all of this leadership training paid for by the companies I worked for. And when I look back at that time, again, I think just engaging in a human conversation of like, wow, you have all this experience. Like, what's going on? Because I'm really disappointed, and now I hate your fucking guts. Like, can we talk about like where'd you go off the rails? I mean, because I didn't know that I had potentially gone off the rails. And time does help in terms of, and a lot of therapy, and frankly, a lot of training as a coach, and it does. I can look at that experience now and see where my part did lie, at least from, again, from my side. It wasn't
Right.
perfect.
Right.
And there were things where we could have had conversation, and where, again, just maturity and, a few more years under my belt where I'm like, okay. And I coach people in that now, like, make sure and keep the people above you up to speed with what you're doing. Don't assume that even though you think it is absolutely right, that they think so too. But frankly, the biggest thing that would have changed it all would just have been some real conversation around it before it turned so bad, where, I asked another really highly, it was one of the owners, and I just said, do you know how bad it feels to walk by somebody who just hates your guts and who doesn't care if you drop dead? And he had no answer. And it was just so painful because it was so clear he knew, and it was not going to be stopped.
Mm. That is so tough, right? But when you're in that place, it's kind of like your decision to make, right? Like, okay, this is what they're tolerating. This is what
Yeah.
they're okay with for their
Yeah,
business. Am I going to continue to be a part of that?
exactly. And that's where, as a coach, and I think, as the individual, and I think somebody in your comments had said, when times are tough, right? People can get, we all know when times are tough, belts get tighter, and things get more scrutinized, people get more scrutinized. But we have to always too, and one of the things I ask people is a just, have, really help them discern, is it the company? Have you seen this? Is this a pattern?
Mhm,
Or is this really just happening to you? And
mhm.
and have you experienced this kind of reaction with other people? It's important to know, like, we all have blind spots. Like, we're not perfect, and there might be there definitely, like I said, I can look at my own behavior, my own performance now much easier and say, I could have done better in some areas. Could I have fixed that situation? Oh my God, not in a million years.
Yeah, right. That's a good point. So you pulled out some key things that I want to tie into like what we're seeing in workplaces right now. You mentioned recognition. People don't realize how far that goes. And I say it all the time, like, do you want to boost your employee engagement with something that's free? Because everybody thinks they need to give bonuses and raises and promotions. And that's not always available, especially when times are tough.
Mhm.
Giving positive feedback and recognition is free, and it'll be the most valuable thing you do. And in fact, they suggest doing a 5-to-1 ratio. So 5 positive pieces of feedback to each critical piece of feedback. So think
Mhm.
about that. If you do need to be driving and giving critical feedback, make sure you are giving that positive feedback in that 5-to-1 ratio. That will really motivate people to want to be better because they love getting that positive feedback from you. So you really train people to want to pursue that and work harder to receive that. So ultimately, that will work in your favor. But really, that's free. Please do that. And then you said opportunities to train, to be developed, to grow. That is the leading reason why top performers are attracted to an organization, an opportunity that maybe they're applying for, and why they stay at organizations. That's everything to do with those growth opportunities. And I'm not just talking about promotions, I'm talking about, can you help develop me into a stronger employee? Like technical skills, leadership skills. A lot of companies aren't paying for coaching. All of these things really, really lead to happier employees, more engaged employees, and ultimately a stronger bottom line.
Mhm.
Chris did it earlier and said that she wishes there was a place there or a way to support the conversation about a toxic work environment internally. And I would just say to that, if you guys aren't talking about culture as an organization, you're going to be forced to talk about culture eventually. And
Mhm.
it's no fun to do it when everything has gone south. A turnaround is so hard. It requires so much time, so much financial investment. If you're a business owner, if you're a leader watching this, I can't stress enough how important it is that culture should be a regular part of your conversation. The famous words of Peter Drucker, right? Like culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have,
Mhm.
I see companies do this all the time though. Think about how many strategic meetings you've been in, corporate strategy planning sessions, right? People invest so much money in this and they don't invest in their culture. And that is one of the biggest mistakes that we see people make.
Yeah, Brittany, I have written several times that leadership goes so much further than the desk. And what I mean by that is, if you are, cracking the whip at work, so to speak, and always, just if you're terrible to your people, if you're not kind, right? It's not that these people at the end of the day are just like, oh, okay, oh, I'm just leaving work, I'm fine now, right? It's like they take that with them. They take it home with them. Then they don't have the energy for their kids. They don't have energy for their workout. They don't have energy for their partner. And it really, the opposite is true too. Like if you are a leader, even if it's to say, you needed your team to work really hard and do something, it's just like, hey, you know what? I saw that thing come through at 11:30 last night. I really appreciate it. I know it was late. I know that's why you're tired today, but thank you. Right? I mean, like that, they take that too. And then it's just like, oh yeah, well, no problem. I don't mind, because generally I think everybody really wants to do a good job. And to your point earlier, that, and it's not just praise for praise's point, but it's just that recognition. I think one of the most terrible feelings we can have as humans is to not be seen, right? I mean, we want to be seen, and to not be seen, or to be feel like we are only seen as, for our flaws. It is just so damaging. And you can, if you're a leader, your impact goes so far. It goes so much further than you might be aware of. You are reaching into people's hearts and homes and into their families. So whether you're really good or really bad, it's time to take stock and be a really good one. It's like, because you can impact, you can be doing things philanthropically that you don't even know by recognizing that somebody's working really hard for you, and then, of course, if you can give them a raise, great. But you're going to motivate them as much or more by letting them know that you see what they're doing and that their contributions matter to you.
Right. Really important stuff. Kamrin, thank you so much for being here. I know I learned a lot from just hearing your experience and how people could do things differently. I know we had a lot of participation. Thank you guys from the audience for being here and submitting great feedback and questions along the way. Kamrin, how can people reach out to you if they want to learn more about your work or hear about your podcast?
Oh, thank you. It's very easy to find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on, LinkedIn is the easiest way, or the podcast 50 Not Dead is on every major platform. And if you have a story that you'd like to share about gendered ageism or want to have a discussion about it, by all means, please reach out. I'm here for you. Thank you,
Awesome.
Brittany.
Well, we will make sure that your LinkedIn information is on the show notes. If you are watching this live, you probably see her LinkedIn right there. We just love having you on and love the experience and the gift you're bringing to the world by creating a place for people to land that have had struggles but are looking to kind of overcome them. So thank you again for sharing your eye-opening moments with us. And thank you to the audience for being here and all of your participation. Until next time, guys, create an amazing work and personal life that you're proud of, that feels fulfilling for you, because ultimately that's the most important thing we can do. Thank you.